Hello there, and welcome to a new video for Age of Wonders 4. In this one, I got a unit guide for the Barbarian culture. I'm going to give you an analysis of each unit in the roster, and at the end of this video, I'm going to summarize their military identity, some strengths and weaknesses included. Timestamps are in the description box. Let's get started with the Scout unit. So, the Scouts of this faction, they are pretty standard in many ways. They can shoot a bow like every other scout. They ride a horse like the most of these. They come with a lower movement cost for rocky, woody, and swampy terrain, which is really cool. But first and foremostly, they are outpost builders, and this is their main role in the Barbarian roster. These guys can do what normally only heroes can do, and therefore they're really an important unit for your armies in general. But beyond that, they don't have much to offer. As any scout unit, they are only very mediocre in combat stats. I want to add in here that if you swap in a mount trait in the body slot of your species while you're creating a faction, these guys will inherit that mount, and this powers them up quite a lot. If you add in, for example, a spider mount, these guys get to shoot an AoE web attack every 3 rounds, which is enhancing their potential by a lot. This is, for the Barbarian units, especially important because you will end up with more scout units than the regular player due to the outpost building scheme that you can go for. Therefore, I think upgrading them with a cultural mount trait is really worth it, but you don't have to. If you don't upgrade their mounts, keep in mind that military-wise, they are the weakest unit in your roster. Now, let's get over to the real units, shall we? The Warrior, your Tier 1 Shield unit. It's really one of your bread and butter units, and this guy is, for one, featuring a normal damage. The damage here is a little bit higher because we are transformed into Spawnkin here already. That's giving a 20% bonus to the damage, but beyond that, 10 damage, standard attack, nothing special. What's really special about these guys is their Sheath Bash skill. Every 2 turns, they get to stun a unit, and what's even better about it, they even end their turn into defense mode there. This is really amazing, because that means you can take out one priority target either in the enemy front line or in your back line, and then protect everybody around you. This is a really cool thing on its own, but combined with the Primal Strike, which is the trademark skill that every melee unit of the Barbarian roster has, it basically lets your first attack in every battle smack harder. This is really interesting in the synergy with the Shield Bash, because this way you can conserve that skill here, because you won't attack in the first turn. We'll have that in a second or even in the third turn in some circumstances, and this is a nice finisher. You know, those units that only have a scrap of health left. With the Primal Strike in combination, you can even take down a little bit of the stronger units with just one of your shields without expending much of your offensive powers. And on top of that, they are fairly resistant against the physical damage. They got 2 points basic, and they got shield defense always on, so they always have a pretty decent physical defense, but no magical resistance whatsoever. But it's a tier 1 unit. Let's get not too picky here. These guys are really amazingly strong tier 1 shield units, because they are called shield units, but as a matter of fact, they are also part of your DPS, because, you know, they have a standard attack, they have the Alpha Strike improvement here, and they are very good receivers for enchantments. So don't get the picture that these guys are defensive units. They are somewhere between. They are hybrids between offensive and defensive skills. Due to the stun, they are highly versatile, but their damage is nothing to sneeze at either. Although it's not nearly as good as the damage of your skirmisher units. As Barbarians, you are the only faction that gets to use Skirmishers and in their base roster. Skirmishers' main sales point is that they are faster than other units and they don't trigger opportunity attacks, so they can just slip between enemy lines or just run away if they get cornered. This is on its own really powerful. Their major attributes here are a really powerful melee attack. Their base damage is 12, which is 2 points more than the regular tier 1 unit, and most importantly, a pretty powerful ranged attack that also sunders enemies' defenses. This is also a skill that only needs 1 action point, therefore these guys are your perfect backline damage providers when your shield units are in front, your skirmishers stand behind there and they can just javelin down. And afterwards, you go into melee. It's really important that you keep this order in mind, because these guys, they just melt like ice in the sunshine if you ever let the enemy take the first blow on these. Just 50 HP, no resistances whatsoever, there's really nothing to back them up, and higher tier units can easily one-shot a 100% HP unit of these if you don't position them well. So therefore, only get into melee if you know that there will be not much opposition afterwards. Otherwise, the Javelin is just nice. It has no cooldown, it deals nice damage, and it softens up the enemy until you are safe to get these guys into the enemy face. Alright, so I failed to mention that they also have Primal Strike, but that's, like I said, it's a nice offer strike tool which lets you focus out your priority targets better, but it doesn't influence the identity of the skirmishes as a whole. So let's get on over to tier 2. So I just want to point out here quickly that the tier 1 roster of the Barbarian faction is amazing. That's why we get struck with the tier 2 Archer unit like these. These are as bland of a frame as they could possibly be. They are just tier 2 Archers with a standard attack, no traits whatsoever, a tad bit of defense because they are tier 2 units, a tad bit of more HP because they are tier 2 units again, but their real hidden ability lies in the fact that if you pick a mount trait for your species, those guys get it too. Unlike other species where often the mounts get pumped on the tier 3 units, the barbarians get their extra mounted units here on the archers, and that is a total game changer. If you have these guys all of a sudden mounted, they can all of a sudden go Mongolian style mounted cavalry on your enemies. They inherit that trait of the mount itself, beat spiders, teleporting unicorns, point blank AoE shooting wolves. That also boosts these guys when they stand in the line. You can really select whatever you want. It's going to be a straight up upgrade for these guys. If you don't choose to, it's not as bad as it might sound in the first place. These guys are still good receivers for buffs because they have a pretty decent base damage. Every percentile damage increase goes okay on them, but in all honesty, I think without cavalry, these guys are pretty much the weakest part in your roster. Basically, the equalizer for your amazing tier 1 roster. You can though do wondrous things once you have these guys mounted. Good, let's get on over to the tier 2 support unit, the War Shaman. This guy is an interesting one. I consider it one of the typical jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none units. You have only one supporting skill, but this is jack-loaded with a lot of targets. You get to hit in one hex target radius, so that means up to a lot of units. I think it's 6. Whatever. 6 or 7, depend. I got a brain fart right now, but you get the idea that you can hit a lot of units with that, and you get to heal them a bit, you get to strengthen them a bit, you get to regenerate them a bit, but it's just like a little bit of everything and nothing specialized. So that's where these guys lack. They have no specialization, but they surely are damn useful to have because that skill is really always good. Its major downside, though, is that it only can be put on a hex radius field, so your units will be needing to ball together. That's a little bit of a difficult thing, but it's still a solid skill. Beyond that, I want to mention that the War Shaman is one of the highest DPS supporters due to the fact that they can poison the enemy, which does really a decent amount of damage per turn. It's a 90% chance, so if the enemy isn't resistant against poison, these guys are chucking out way more damage than the average supporter. That's their upside for being a little bit on the meh side on the support. I don't want to make it sound too bad. It's a really good skill, but it has a cooldown of 3, and after that, they're just not as versatile as other supporters. But we can agree, I guess, at the end of the day, the Berserker is just worth waiting for. This is one hell of a unit, and I personally think it's really a good excuse for your rather bland tier 2 roster. So these guys are shock units, so they break defensive stances, and they also counter retaliation attacks except for pole arms. So these guys are heavy chargers, so that means they can remove retaliation attacks and they can ignore charge resistance. So that's pretty neat. Usually only mounted cavalry shock units get that trait, but these guys are too much of a berserker for that, I guess. So their major unique points are, for one, the Berserker's Rage, which makes them go berserking once they go 33% or lower, with the added bonus that they go stat fast for 1 turn. So that means the moment they go below 33%, they go unkillable for 1 turn. And you lose control over them, but that makes them hard to kill, you know? This is the type of unit that you just need to focus properly down to take them down the right way. I'm not sure if you can properly one-shot them if you have to play against them. I still have to try that. Feel free to leave me a comment down there if you can counter that by just smacking away the 33% at once. I don't know that yet, but even if, it still requires the enemy to focus you down properly, and that makes these guys just a major pain to deal with. Add as some injury to the insult that frenzy trait, which just gives them a stack of strengthened whenever they get to attack. Not when they get damaged, but when they do an attack. This is amazing because that means the longer they get to do their job, the more devastating they go. So I love these guys. You need to add in some enchantments on them, and then you have a really massive, strong frontline frame that just is much harder to kill than your skirmishers, and they basically take up the place of the Sunderers in terms of melee. And once you have berserkers, you can use the Sunderers as very mobile ranged units that have a massive smack in the melee if necessary. I really like this roster in a grand picture. They are really super strong right from the get-go. The tier 1 roster alone is amazing. I want to point out here that you can use the Sunderers and the Pathfinders together because they happen to have the same amount of movement points per turn. Don't buff the movement points if you're Pathfinders, that is, of course. But that means you can bring Pathfinder troops with Sunderers together to found those outposts and claim sites behind the enemy lines, and you can do so much guerrilla shenanigans with that roster. Alone for that, I love them. You have to pay attention though to the rather disappointing tier 2 roster. They are not necessarily bad units. I just want to say that other factions get way more powerful stuff in the tier 2 area, but they have to be balanced at some point, and this is basically your gap. You get a really nice bonus though if you last through to the end, because berserkers, well, they are really massive units. They just round up your roster that well. The thing here is, with these guys though, you are always a little bit low on the defensive side. I didn't mention it here, but except for your berserkers, most of your units really die quite quickly. Your warriors can be shot down by magical damage really easily. The only thing saving you from that would be the defensive stance from your war shamans, so you really have a weak spot on magic damage in general. So this is something you should pay attention to, especially if there is a mystic player in the game. Then you really should have an eye out on that, because this is where your troops are just on the weak side. They melt fast. That's why I love the berserkers so much, because if you play them right, you can use them to like tank the enemy fire a little bit and be just very useful hand grenades to protect your backlines. But this is where I want to end this summary. This is one of the factions that in the later stages of the game will just have losses. It's hard to avoid losses with this faction because their playstyle is just so in your face that often I made the experience that I was downgrading my efficiency when I was starting to play too safe. Often it is worth to let that Sunderer die if he was able to just take down that guy before that guy was taking down your war shaman or whatever. It is one of those factions where you really should always try to get a lot of damage in while trying to keep as many people as possible alive. This is the hard part. It gets a little bit easier by having access to stuff like Song of the Reckless and Vision of Victory, but none of your spells are, again, protecting your guys. The only thing that you have here is Berserk, which is negating the casualty penalties, but here again, that doesn't protect your units. So losses are hard to avoid with this faction. If this bothers you, the Barbarians are a really good practice because you get a lot of payoff if you throw your hand grenades right. So that being said, I hope this was a helpful summary for you. Leave me your comments down below. I'm pretty sure that I have missed a spot or two because this faction is quite deep and I haven't had the chance to fully explore it yet myself. Feel free to leave a thumbs up. A subscription would be wildly welcome as well. And as usual, I want to point out that there is a playlist link down there leading to the other Age of Wonders videos that I made. So if you want to have more videos like these, knock yourself out, there's an entire list down there. So what's left to say? Yeah, a big thanks to my supporters. I really appreciate what you're doing for the channel, and therefore big thanks. Check out Patreon, PayPal, and buy me a coffee if you want to find out more about what I'm talking here. If not, let me say thanks for staying around at this very end of the video. You know, not very many people do that. So have a wonderful day and see you next time.